Hello, everyone. This week I am back to doing interviews. I talked to my friend and former coworker, Erin Apple, who is the coordinator of youth programs at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. I really wanted to invite somebody on to talk about environmental education. So we definitely get into the nitty-gritty of this career option for wildlife biologists, ecologists, zoologists, conservation biologists, etc. But we also talk a lot about science communication and just how we should approach the public in talking about different nature, wildlife conservation issues. So even if you're not interested in this as a career path, this is a super interesting interview to talk about how we should engage people, especially people who are really absolute or established in their opinions on certain issues. So it's extremely interesting and we have a really fun conversation. Erin's a great person and it's so funny because I've talked to her Girls in Science program a million times. So today we got to turn the tables and I got to interview her and it was just so great. So I hope you enjoy this interview of environmental educator Erin Apple. Hi, Erin. Welcome to the Fancy Scientist podcast. I am so excited to have you here today to talk about careers in environmental education.
Hi, Stephanie. Thank you so much for having me.
First, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got to be where you are today?
Absolutely. And that's kind of an interesting story because I work in environmental education, but I originally did not even realize this was a career. When I was in college, I kind of stumbled across it and thought, oh, wow, they pay people to do this? That's amazing. I want to do this as a job. So backing up a little bit, I realized that I wanted to study something related to wildlife or natural resources. And so I went to NC State and I studied wildlife biology there. I was in the Fisheries, Wildlife, and Conservation Bio program with the Wildlife Sciences concentration, and I graduated in 2013 with my bachelor's in that. But in 2011, I got my first internship over the summer while I was in school. And that was out on the coast. I worked at Jockey's Ridge State Park, and I was a seasonal assistant park ranger out there. I'm very excited to help with things like general park maintenance duties and natural resource management activities like oyster reef restoration and things like that. But part of my job was to give educational programs. And I had never wanted to be a teacher. I was always on the path of, I want to do something outside. I want to do something with wildlife. But when I started teaching educational programs, I realized I can talk all day to people about topics that interest me. And so I really fell in love with it. I had some wonderful supervisory staff there who introduced me to the North Carolina Environmental Education Certification Program. And I started working on my certification, finished that in 2016. So now I'm a certified environmental educator. And from there, it was several different jobs working in parks as educators until I found my position at the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, where I'm at right now.
So when you were at Jockey's Ridge, it was like, that was your epiphany. Like, I really like talking to people like this, and then you can have a career doing this. From that point on, previously, I guess you probably thought you wanted a career in research. Is that correct? And then from that point on, you're like, no, I like talking to people about research more.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I almost think of my job a little bit as a translator. I like to be the person who is keeping up to date on not just different topics in science, but like you said, current research, and disseminating that in a digestible format to the general public. Environmental education is all about increasing science literacy, and that is something that I think is so critically important. So it's a very fulfilling job. I will say I felt a little like I was thrown in off the deep end somewhat at Jockey's Ridge, because having never been at all interested in public speaking, teaching, really nervous for any of these things, I ended up covering for another staff member's program called Sunset on the Ridge. And I had to go up to the top of Jockey's Ridge big, tall sand dune formation out in Nags Head, North Carolina, and meet with some folks who are up there enjoying the sunset and give a basic talk about the history of the park, the wildlife of the park, and the ecology of the ecosystems in the area. And I anticipated maybe 5 to 10 people. It was a beautiful night. I got up there, again, never having done this before, and ended up coming face to face with about 65 people in a huge circle around me. And I didn't even have a chance to think about getting nervous. I just had to hop off my gator and say, hello, welcome to Jockey's Ridge, and jump right into it. And it was like learning to swim by being thrown in off the deep end. And I've really been hooked ever since.
Have you, or did you have a chance to practice before you did that, or was it kind of like all on the cuff?
I had seen the program given before, so
Okay.
I knew what it was all about, and I had a general kind of script, but again, I was really expecting a small conversation with just a few people, and it ended up being full presentation style to a huge group, and I loved it. I didn't think that I would. When I was growing up, I was very shy. I never thought that I wanted to do anything in public speaking. So who knew that I would have ended up loving a career where I'm talking for a living.
Do you consider yourself extroverted?
I do. I consider myself to be a little bit of a shy extrovert, if that is a thing. I'm really not very introverted. I do need my alone time, but I love talking to people. I love interacting with people. So I just push past my shyness every day and just show up.
I think I'm an outgoing social introvert. So I'm the opposite.
Oh, that's great.
So can you tell us about your job at the museum now and what you do? And do you think this career in general, like if you are introverted, do you think you can enter this career? Or is it really more for people who are just like, purely outgoing and very social?
That's a great question. And I'll answer that. I think yes, but I'll get to that in a minute. As for my day-to-day activities, I'm in a job where every day looks so very different. I'm planning educational programming, leading educational programming, and still staying connected with my natural resources background by helping out the museum in other ways, such as prescribed burning out at the Prairie Ridge Eco Station. I am certified to conduct prescribed burns, so I do help out with that a little bit, which is fun. But as for kind of explaining what I do to somebody who I meet who doesn't know what it is that an environmental educator does, I always say, have you ever been to a zoo or an aquarium or a museum and you see somebody there with a bird on their arm giving a talk, or somebody standing in front of a big tank or in the tank at an aquarium interacting with visitors and teaching people about different things, or maybe standing in an auditorium with a big slideshow behind them, doing a quiz show or something like that. That's me. That's what I do. So working at the museum, I do get a mix of working in person and off site. Of course, virtual this past year too. I've had to grow my Bill Nye skills, if you will, and learn how to teach it online. But a lot of my job is program development and funding seeking. I need to make sure that we're able to, have grants and support to run the programs that we want to run. I do a lot of work with DEAI, diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion, to broaden the scope of our programs and make sure that I'm doing outreach not just to school groups or to people who can pay to come to our programs or get themselves to the museum, but also reach new audiences in new ways. And that's very rewarding. I also get to travel a decent amount with my job in normal times. I have, for example, taken a group of 13 teenagers to Yellowstone National Park for 8 days. We lived in the park and
fun.
Moved around and just saw the whole thing in a very immersive experience. So it looks like a lot of different things. Some days are really cool and really fun, and some days are very much just sitting at a desk and writing a grant application.
So it sounds like you do that quite frequently, right? Grants, that's a big part of it for somebody who wants to get into this job.
It is a skill that is really good to have. It really depends on what kind of institution you're working with. And I only did a little bit of grant writing when I was working for parks. When I was working for parks, I was doing a lot of education, but wearing many other hats, everything from natural resource management to park maintenance. I mean, I would go out and give a wonderful educational program and be the expert, and then I'd have to go and scrub a toilet. That's just what happens when you work in parks. So I will say I do prefer my job now in that I don't have to scrub toilets anymore. Sometimes I miss being outside, but I do get to have my time out there. But yeah.
And you don't necessarily have to be extroverted for this job, or can somebody who is like maybe shyer or not as comfortable public speaking, can they become comfortable in this job and still enjoy it?
Absolutely. Although I consider myself to be an extroverted person, I am shy. I never thought that I would feel comfortable in a job where I was speaking or giving presentations for a living. I never thought that I would sign up for something like that. But when you feel like you're making a difference, and when you're talking to people in an informal environment, teaching them about subjects that you're passionate about, and watching, for example, watching their opinion on something like a misunderstood species of wildlife, like snakes or sharks, watching their opinion change from fear and revulsion to fascination and appreciation is so darn rewarding. I can do it all day. So yeah, absolutely. I also did not learn how to do this well overnight. That first program that I gave up on top of Jockey's Ridge that evening, I'm sure left a lot to be desired. But you build these skills over time. I learned a lot in my certification program. By the way, that is run by a parent organization, NAAEE, the North American Association for Environmental Educators. That association is overseeing, I think, 15 to 20 different state certification programs right now, and growing all the time. So no matter where you are in the States, there's probably some sort of interpretive guide certification or environmental education certification that, if you are interested in changing people's opinions and working to increase science literacy, but nervous about the actual speaking part, there's so many resources that are ever growing, ever changing to help people who are interested in this career right now.
Do you think for somebody, like say somebody is going down the science route, would they need to get their master's in education? Is that a good idea for them to do? When I was applying for education jobs, it seemed to me that they valued educational experience more. And going through my PhD, it was always kind of presented to me like, oh, if you don't like research, like you can always do education. But they're totally different things. And just because you're good at science does not mean you're good at teaching it or outreach.
You know, that's true. I hear a lot of people, I work in a museum, you know, we see a lot of people who are pushed very hard to share their research with the public and do more and more education and outreach. And not only do they maybe enjoy it, maybe not, they may not have the time. And that's why people like me exist. It's a special skill set. You have to have the science background, but in order to understand, you know, what you're talking about, you have to be sort of a broad scale expert in a little bit of a lot of different things.
So true.
But yes. But yes, I think having my science background, especially because I work primarily with natural science education, meaning that I'm going and taking people on hikes through the woods. I'm working with live animals. I'm teaching people about the things I learned through my degree program in college. My bachelor's degree serves me very well for that. If I want to eventually sort of move up the ladder and get into a managerial position somewhere, say at a museum or an aquarium or a zoo, something like that, yes, I would have to probably have a master's for that. But right now, what set me apart was having that science background and completing my certification. I think that's what set me apart in the pile of folks who maybe have the science background or the education background, but not that real world experience. And that's another thing, that certification program gets you the real world experience. You have to complete teaching hours for it. And you do that by volunteering. And that is so critical. That's how you build that ability. Without volunteering, without doing any and every internship that I possibly could have done, I wouldn't have gotten the experience that I needed to get these jobs, which can be competitive.
Mm-hmm. So you mentioned in the beginning that you didn't like teaching, and I kind of felt similar. Like, I love doing outreach, but I never wanted to become a teacher or professor. Can you talk about why like teaching turned you off, but you liked outreach, and maybe just like some of the differences between them?
I sure can. I have the highest respect for formal educators, for classroom teachers. I could never do that job. I had a job right out of college, a seasonal job at a nature center, where I went into a couple of different local schools for 2 or 3 days, full days, and taught a full day of genetics science classes to kids. And I have never been more exhausted at the end of those days. Those were difficult. Classroom management is something that is a whole different skill set. And I never had any desire to be a teacher. I think it's a calling to be a classroom teacher. The benefit to being a formal educator is that you have the same group of students. I think you get to watch them grow, mold them, help set them on a path. Whereas informal educators, we usually only get people for a semester or a single program or experience. But for me, I love that. I love the opportunity to reach all different age groups. I love working with adults. Right now at the museum, I work with teens, but I've taught programs where the youngest person is a baby and the oldest person is 80 or 90 or even older. So I love that sort of variety. And another thing I've heard many environmental educators I've talked to about this say is we're a little bit spoiled in that the people who are at our programs are there because they want to be, they chose to be. Yet I don't have to deal with folks who are in a classroom in school because they have to be there and they don't want to learn and engage with the content. So I get the privilege of speaking with people who are really enthusiastic. Or on the flip side, if I get, say, funding to do an outreach program in a Title I school or in an area where the students that I'm working with have not had the same opportunities to be exposed to science or live animals or just any of the things that I like to talk about, that they're usually so excited that we're there to share a live animal or do something exciting. I get to be kind of the fun person who pulls them into science, and I love that.
And you mentioned that you've changed some people's opinions. And for adults, that's super hard to do. I've done some social science research, and adults are really set in their values. And like you talked a little bit about having fear of animals. Do you have tips for how we can change opinions? And do you have a story about maybe a particular person who had a dramatic shift?
Yeah. Oh, I have so many stories about people who both.
And I'm worried you wouldn't have a specific story, but
I know. I also have plenty of stories of people who did not have a dramatic shift, who I didn't reach at all. But it's just my favorite kind of topic to talk about. I love talking to people about things that they might be afraid of. It can be mentally draining and exhausting to feel like you want to make a difference so much. I firmly believe that conservation is driven by an educated public. And if we don't have a general populace who appreciates wildlife, all wildlife, not just the fuzzy, cuddly ones, conservation efforts are going to fail. So believing so strongly that what I do every day is going to influence people means that when I don't influence them, I have a hard time not taking it personally. But on the flip side of that, it's so great to see, kids who have never touched a snake, for example. I have my little tricks, like if they're scared and they don't want to touch the animal when I'm bringing the animal around during a live animal program, we have our 2-finger touch rule. You have to reach out with just 2 fingers and touch the animal, such as like the back of the snake. I'll tell kids if they're hesitant, well, how about just 1 finger? And for some reason that works. And then I can get them to poke at the snake a little bit and watch their faces change. Like, wow, it's not slimy. It's not scary. This is really cool. Suddenly they're bubbling with all of these questions, and I love it. I do have to deal with quite a bit of people who like to tell stories about snakes that they've killed or bad interactions with wildlife. My favorite response to that is just, oh, wow, that makes me sad. And that usually makes people step back and say, oh, really? You're sad that I killed this snake? Like, yeah, they're really valuable. And let me start a conversation with you now about why that is and how fascinating they actually are. I find with adults, I might not get them to the point of fascination or full appreciation, but I can give good information that'll keep them from harming wildlife or putting themselves in harm's way by trying to kill venomous snakes or just having negative interactions with or unnecessary fear about the wildlife that's in their own backyard. And that's valuable.
Yeah, that's super valuable information. I'm working on my niece. She stayed with me from Buffalo, New York. And it's actually funny because like we were in the backyard and I was like, you have to be careful because like I'm not scared of snakes, and even venomous snakes. I've been around them a lot. And I mean, of course I'm like, yeah, I have a healthy fear of them. I'm not going to like play with them and stuff. But I was like, oh, you should probably be aware of what a copperhead looks like. And the next morning, there's actually a dead copperhead right outside our house. We didn't do it.
Yeah.
And I was like, you should come out and look to see what a copperhead looks like. And she's like, no. I'm like, it's dead.
Oh, I know. It's a shame because copperheads, that is so much that particular species comes up. You know, I firmly believe that you don't get anywhere by being condescending to people. And I do not like to laugh at or make fun of people or put people down for their past interactions or beliefs about wildlife. But I do have my moments where kind of a running joke around educators like me is, oh, did you know that everything's a copperhead? Because we just don't have very good, I would say, snake identification literacy in our, and not even just in our area. I really think this is a national, even global problem.
Yeah, it's a search engine thing. Like I feel that way. Like with I mean, I've seen myself evolve with copperheads. Like I used to have a hard time telling them the difference between them and water snakes, and now it's like, oh, I can tell it right away. You just need to develop that skill.
Yeah. Well, I had so many stories from parks. I had a woman who called who absolutely was insistent that in her campsite there was a copperhead and we needed to come remove it. Well, I'm not a wildlife removal specialist. I have opinions about, you know, there are certainly people who do good work and save the lives of plenty of snakes and other wildlife by moving them. And then there's some other folks who claim to be, you know, removal specialists who maybe don't follow the ethical standards that I would follow. But that aside, she was so insistent that I had to come and move this copperhead. It's definitely a copperhead. I need you to come and move it. And so I had a minute. I drove down to her campsite, met up with them, and it was, I kid you not, a worm snake. They're about this long. They're called worm snakes because they look exactly like worms and they live underground and they eat worms. A butterfly is more dangerous than a worm snake. And it just makes you think, you know, we have so much fear about the unknown, and that's why it's so valuable to be a person who gets to change people's opinion about our wildlife, to use my knowledge of the wildlife in the state, not to, you know, my calling is not research. There's wonderful, incredible wildlife research that's being done, and I'm so thankful for that. But I think my particular calling is to change public opinion and do conservation through outreach and education.
I totally agree. I feel like that's my calling too. Like I thought it was research, and then doing, I mean, I love research, but for me, I was always driven by conservation, and just doing so much research, I was like, and I mean, even just like the changing perspectives and opinions of science of people, at least here in the United States, it's like, okay, we can have all the data in the world, but if people don't understand how science works and or are not able to interpret the data, or have distrust issues in the way it was collected, and scientists, it doesn't matter how much research we have, that it's all about, like you said, the education and the talking to people. I love that you said about not making people feel dumb, because that's something that I used to do. It's like, oh, like, I mean, I wouldn't purposely do it, but it's like, oh, how do they not get that? That's like, that's so stupid of them. They're being stupid. But with doing more of my blogging business, I went to this one talk at an internet conference, it was like an online marketing conference. And I went to this wonderful talk by this woman, and she's like, people want to feel good, smart, and capable. And so that's something I try to keep in mind, but it is hard when somebody contradicts something that is, the science is on your side. So my example is Black Panthers. I have this video about there being no Black Panthers in the US unless it's like an exotic escaped animal. And so many people are commenting, like, I'm really starting to get some negative comments now.
Oh, no.
I'm talking about blah, blah. So how, like, do you have tips for like how to talk to people like that? Like if I were to give a talk in North Carolina and I had to do this, and there are no Eastern mountain lions, the United States Fish and Wildlife Service declared them extinct, and people would be like, no, we saw them, we know they're here. Like how do you have tips for like how to talk to people?
Oh, wow. That is a daily challenge, honestly. I don't want to ever make fun of anyone. I will say sometimes I've noticed a correlation between how absolutely sure someone is of themselves and how wrong they actually are. I find people
I do agree with that. I do agree with that.
So there are always going to be some people who absolutely believe that what they saw was what they saw, and there's no changing their mind.
That's true, yeah.
But I think you have to focus your time and attention on people who are just misinformed. And you cannot approach someone who has not had the opportunity to learn these things and say that, come off as condescending towards them just because of ignorance. We think about ignorance as such a bad word, but it's not. It's simply a lack of knowledge. And you having knowledge that somebody else has does not make you better than them. We all make the best decisions that we have with the information that we know. And as long as I'm able to take what I've learned and take the science that I'm getting from researchers in the field and disseminate it to people in a healthy, respectful way, and not call them out for bad behavior, not make them feel bad for having a fear of wildlife. Instead, teach them really cool topics in a positive way, give them fun facts, give them good information, and teach them how to find a good source to go on and continue to find their own information. Those would be my tips, I think. It's challenging, it's difficult. Not everybody who you're going to interact with is going to be polite to you, but you do get those interactions where you can change people's minds, and it's great.
And even like you were saying before, like you maybe get disappointed sometimes because you don't change people's minds. Changing minds is, like I said, super difficult, and you don't know, like you could be the first like seed planted and it might take 10 more conversations for them to change their mind. Or there's so much research on cultural norms, and I've even seen it like just the past few years talking about fast fashion. Like you see a lot of fashion labels now, whether they're greenwashing or not, they're talking about recycled fabrics and organic cotton and things like that. So, so yeah, the more we talk about these things, you might be the first quote unquote crazy person in the beginning. and then hopefully it catches up. No, we're not crazy.
I know, when I was first getting into this field, I had this desire to portray myself in a certain way. And I was very hesitant to bring up any sort of fears or problems that I may have had in the past or still have with wildlife. And one example to me is I adore spiders. We have some of the coolest species of spiders here in North Carolina. They're fascinating. Spider webs, I love them. I can appreciate them. If I touch them, it's an involuntary panic attack reaction. And I used to keep that so tightly hidden inside because I wanted to be taken seriously by other wildlife professionals. And I didn't think that you could be taken seriously if you jump and scream around and flap your hands if you touch a spider web. So I would keep that to myself, but that's just alienating me from other folks who have perfectly natural reactions to a lot of different things that they may not be able to control. And so when I switched gears and started telling people, oh yeah, yes, I'm handling this Madagascar hissing cockroach right now, but I was a little nervous to handle them for the first time. It took me some time to get used to that. Or, I still don't like to touch spider webs. They're awesome. I can appreciate them. I'm not going to knock them down, but I also don't like to touch them. That just humanizes me, and that makes them feel okay to share not only, wow, yeah, I have some fears and hesitations like that too, but also, hey, it's possible to change. It's possible to change your mind about things and grow and come to appreciate something that you may otherwise have just had a fear of and stayed away from.
I was doing field work on the eastern coast of North Carolina, and I hit a spider web seriously like every 4 feet.
Oh no!
I would have died. It was. I don't get freaked out when I touch them, but I definitely don't like touch it up. Like, it's not pleasant experience. But
yeah.
And the other thing with fears about at least certain species, I mean, it's definitely an evolutionary driven fear. Like for snakes, there are venomous snakes that kill us. They kill us worldwide. Nowadays in the US, we have such good medical treatment. It's extremely rare to die from a snake bite, but worldwide, it can happen. And there's spiders as well. So and even sharks, your chances of getting bit are so low, but it is an evolutionary response. You want to avoid getting hurt. So even actually one of my friends who's a professor, she loves snakes, but she can't look at them. Like, they just freak her out. But she appreciates them ecologically, and knows their.
I think that's the goal. I'd love to add too, a lot of it, yes, there may be that that instinctual kind of basis to it, but humans currently being at the top of the food chain, and I want to view humanity as more caretakers. I'd like to think of us as being capable of thinking beyond that and protecting things that we might initially be. And when it comes to things like snakes, yes, some of it might be innate, but so much of it is passed down. So much of it is cultural. I've worked in so many different facilities where I've been behind a front desk or out on a museum floor where, there's a snake in a tank, and I see a tiny little toddler with their parent standing there pointing at the snake going, look, ew, snake, bad. And it's so hard to see because I'm like, well, that's where it starts.
Yeah.
It's another thing that I like to talk about is even if you yourself as a teacher who's bringing your school group to me, or as a parent who maybe really doesn't like, you're really afraid of sharks, you don't want to go in the ocean. It's okay for you to harbor whatever fears you have. It's hard to change your fears, but I do try to convince people to pass on appreciation rather than fear to the children in their lives, because that can change things.
I love that. Yeah, I grew up, my dad and I would catch frogs and snakes together, and we're in Buffalo, so there are no venomous snakes there. But I got to see them up close, and I was never scared of snakes. I always thought they were super cool, and I never thought they were slimy. I guess because I got to touch them from a really young age.
I would challenge any listener who wants to learn a little bit more about what our cultural perception of snakes is. Just put in a Google search, snake cartoon, and see what pops up, because the reality is so vastly different from what what our imagery of snakes is. If you look at any sort of cartoon, sketch, animated snake, they're absolutely terrifying. Huge fangs, hissing right in your face, big cobras in a very, evil looking defensive posture. There's even biblical connotations that put negative imagery on snakes that is also passed down. But when you get to know the wildlife and what they're actually like, so many people are so shocked, like, wow, not only is this animal not dangerous, but it's really kind of awesome. But yeah, it's interesting to do a little Google search for cartoon snakes and just look at what pops up.
Yeah, and if you want to learn more about snakes, for people listening, I'll put it in the links in the show notes, a link to a podcast episode I have all about snakes and living alongside snakes, and even venomous snakes, and to not fear them.
Oh, that's great.
What was I going to ask you? Oh, what do you think is the most difficult thing to talk about? Either like, challenging to convey, or difficult for, I don't know, like cultural reasons or anything.
Most recently, climate change. And we recently received an NSF grant to fund a pilot project that connects teens with climate scientists and gets them to be ambassadors in their local communities for climate advocacy. Not so much advocacy, that's kind of a tricky word when you're talking about federal funding, but just having good information and disseminating it to the people in their communities, or doing action projects to make a difference. And I had not anticipated the level of very careful thought that has to be put into exactly how you speak about just another topic of research in science. That's all that climate change is. There's piles of research. There's suggestions, hypotheses for things that we can do differently, things that can be done. And it should just be as easy for me to discuss it as any other topic in science. But when something becomes politicized, you have to tread so carefully. And I really hate that, because I wish that it was as simple as just discussing the science, teaching people about it, and moving on that way. But it's the politicization of science that makes my job difficult. Speaking about anything that's a hot button topic, it used to be evolution that was very difficult to talk about. Nowadays, talking about vaccination and disease spread, that's another topic that becomes difficult to talk about. And I've heard of educators receiving some verbal abuse from folks when they try to broach these topics because it becomes so contentious. I like to think that as a science educator, I'm able to work a little bit towards increasing that science literacy and respect for the process of science, and just understanding of how it works. That's going to help people make good decisions, informed decisions. But it's the age of misinformation that we live in right now that makes things very challenging.
Yeah. And if somebody does like push back on you, how should you handle that? Like, do you just accept it, or do you, I've always heard it's good to at least acknowledge like that they feel that way. And
yes.
Yeah.
It goes right back to not making somebody feel stupid for having the opinion that they have. I don't want to ever place the blame for somebody who is misinformed on them. I want to place it on the people in power who are spreading that misinformation knowingly.
Yeah.
But it's challenging, in a personal environment on my own, when I'm talking about these things just because I enjoy talking about it with people who I meet or people in my life. It depends on how much energy I have, whether or not I'm really going to get into it. Like, sometimes I'll feel motivated and I'm like, here's some good sources. Let's sit down and really dig into this. And sometimes, I have to protect my own mental health and step back a little bit. I used to push myself a little too hard sometimes on some of these issues, and now I am a little more okay with stepping back. In a work environment, especially with, we have volunteer educators who we train. I always say, it's not worth it to get into a screaming match with somebody, and it's not professional either. So if somebody is being belligerent in a public space where I'm working as an educator, I tend to just go for the mitigation, de-escalation, change the subject route.
Yeah, and I think it's important, like in your personal life, one of the things that I personally have been disappointed to see is when political things have happened, I've seen people being like, I'm going to defriend people who think this way. And I understand I understand the reasoning behind it, because I feel so passionately about a subject that the way that other people feel is, sometimes a violation of human rights. But the downside of that is that we're losing those conversations with those people. And I have people from the complete opposite end of the political spectrum as me, and we're still friends, and we can still talk about this stuff. And sometimes it does get a little bit heated or excited, and then you just bring it down and be like, okay, well, we can agree on blogging, or we can,
right.
you can always bring it back to common ground. And maybe you didn't change their mind, and it might take like 10 years to change their mind. But like I said, it's like those little seeds that are planted, and it's true. They at least think of things differently. And even for us, I'm like, okay, I can see where they got that from. And, or I could see how I could see how they're using that information or something like that.
Right. I think in order to have valuable conversations, you have to be willing to let go of your own air of superiority, because we all do the best with the knowledge that we have.
Right.
And you can only get so far. I definitely understand needing to distance yourself from folks who maybe are on your social media who are sharing really upsetting things on a regular basis. But it is unfortunate how algorithms are making social media an echo chamber of people who agree with you. It's unfortunate. Or it's
like a hostility chamber. If you comment on someone's, like, then you're constantly getting the exact opposite view. Like you're saying, like this person's always showing up at my feet. Okay. Yes. Anyway, though, we're running out of time here. So I just wanted to finish up and just ask you, like, do you have any like last minute, or not last minute, but like some big tips, or like what's your biggest tip for somebody who wants to go into this field?
Yeah, biggest thing, don't go into this field unless you are really, really passionate. It is not something that anybody goes into for the money. I will say that. And it's something that you have to be willing to show up every day to work in a job that is sometimes thankless, but very often intrinsically rewarding. And for folks who might be in college thinking that or going into college, thinking about, what they want to study, what they want to do, and they're interested in informal education, or really this goes for any STEM career, absolutely volunteer or get internships and see if you like it, because that's the only way you're really going to know. Again, I did not figure out that this was something that I could make a living doing until I was in about my junior year in college, and I had my first experience doing this kind of work. On the flip side, I know folks who were really sure they wanted to do a certain thing and then got a volunteer opportunity or an internship in college and realized, wow, this is not the path for me. And that's okay too. It's just better to figure that out earlier before you're too far into it. So absolutely pursue any and every volunteer internship opportunity that you can, and connect with other folks who are in this field. I know for anyone watching who wants to talk about environmental education, I'm an open book. You can feel free to reach out to me, but I'm not the only resource as well. You can check out any sort of like state certification program or NAAE. They have great resources for people who are considering fields like this. So,
and if people want to reach out to you, where's the best place they should go?
I can provide my email address. I'm happy to share my email address with anyone who'd like to reach out to me. I can also be found on Instagram. I just started a new Instagram account all talking about careers in environmental education. and just doing science communication on my own. And that's enviro.erin. So find me on Instagram, look me up. I am, like I said, an open book, and I am more than happy to help people. Currently working with teens, a lot of my job is talking about careers in science, breaking down stereotypes, connecting people to mentors in the fields that they're interested in. So I have a lot of connections in that way, and I am so happy to share them with anyone who wants them.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. I had so much fun catching up with you, and
yeah, you too.
It was fun talking snakes and spiders too.
I know. It always seems to come back around to that. Trees are another one. I'm surprised I didn't get into talking about trees or fire ecology, but yeah, it always comes down to one of those topics I'm super passionate about. So
maybe next time.
I know. It's been fun. Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Take care.
Thank you once again, Erin. It was a fantastic interview. I loved talking to you. So again, you can find Erin at environ.erin on Instagram. And you can also check out the show notes of this episode, where I link up to her museum page, and you can get her email address. If you have problems finding any of that information, just feel free to contact me and I will pass it along. Thank you guys so much for listening, and I hope you have an amazing day. Be kind to each other, and of course, be kind to animals. That's what we do here on this podcast. Okay, bye.